everybody, and welcome to another episode of Career Diaries by Elemed, the podcast dedicated to talking about careers in the MedTech industry. And today, well, I'm a little bit starstruck, I have to admit, because I have the one and only John Wilkinson on the show. Welcome, John.
Hi, everybody.
So thank you so much for joining us to share your career story. Maybe you could start by just giving a brief overview to those who don't know who you are. Although I'd be surprised if if there's anyone on here listening who doesn't know who you are and what you do.
Okay, I'm sure there's lots of people who don't know. Very kind of you to introduce me in that manner. But yeah, I'm a semi-retired medical device old stager, really. So I've spent the last 45 years in the medical device sector in various guises. I'm now doing bits and pieces of consultancy and a lot of pro bono stuff, really. So for things I feel are important and with people I like. So that's kind of where I am at this stage in my life.
It sounds like the dream to be working in an industry that you love with people that you like. So so let me just go straight in with a really curious question from my side. I had a look at your LinkedIn profile, John.
Yeah.
How does a zoologist with a sales and marketing background become director of devices at the MHRA?
You may well ask. I have to say, if anybody had asked me that even 15 years ago, I'd have gone, it's an impossibility. So I think there's a lesson in that for everybody, that you never quite know where you're going to end up in your career if you're open-minded enough and realize what you can bring to the party, I guess. So I kicked off. I left university not knowing what to do, as a lot of people do. I had 18 months or so in banking, which was a distinct diversion, and that clearly wasn't right for me. So I then went into trade publishing, which was in the sector, broadly speaking, laboratory equipment type stuff. Then on to a sales job selling diagnostics with a company called BD, who you might have heard of. From then, I left them to do my first sort of junior management position with a company called Elemed, which was part of the BOC group at the time. I sort of had a fairly conventional career from that point onwards, sales and marketing roles, general management, until I was late 40s, when I did what a lot of people do, which is fall off the corporate perch. At that time, I was vice president and general manager of one of BD's businesses in Europe. And it happens, it was the right thing to do. It's one of those things that happens in your career, but it does, cause you to have a reset. So at that point, I joined a startup, as you do. You think that's going to be a great and very interesting thing to do. Sadly, interestingly, there's a bit of a mismatch between corporate experience and what you need to run a startup. So that was a very, very informative but quite challenging period of my life. I went from there to running the ABHI, so I became a lobbyist, effectively. From the ABHI to Brussels to Elemed, and had 4 years there. And it was from Elemed that I came back to London to join the MHRA. So a bit of a curious journey, really, but some lessons, a fairly conventional piece between 25 and 45, 48, and then some interesting choices thereafter. Not just for me, choices for the people who employed me as well, I think, probably. So not risk-free. But I think my regulatory experience started effectively in Brussels about 2 months after I turned up, because the Commission then put the recast of the Medical Devices Direct on my desk. And I realized that although I'd only been 2 months into the job, I was going to have to get interested in regulatory stuff and get interested in it fast. So I think that was the sort of starting point. Up to that point, I was like a lot of people, when the regulatory person stood up at meetings, I got my iPhone out. Actually, I don't think I had iPhone in those days, but anything to distract you from the regulatory stuff, which is always too difficult.
Fascinating story. And there's so much in there that I'd love to sort of like dig into. So first question then is obviously sort of you started off in this sales and marketing background before you sort of made that move into, you know, regulatory, more formalized as you explained it. How did having an experience in sales and marketing, how did that help you when you then moved more into the traditional regulatory role later in your career?
I think I was different from most regulators in that I had a much, a very different background. So it was saying, well, what am I bringing to the party here? And I think communications, strategy, interfacing with stakeholders in a constructive way were probably the big things that I brought, because regulatory people are very good and very strong at detailed, stuff, which is about how do you get these products on the market, how do you make sure you follow the rules, how do you make sure that things are safe, and actually, when you're in that level of detail, I think it's quite difficult sometimes to switch to what's the context for what we're doing, how does that relate to the rest of the world, how does it relate to policy. So if you like, I kind of found it a natural place to sit, but I certainly wasn't trying to tell the regulatory specialists how to do their jobs. What I was trying to do is to create an environment where they could do their jobs more effectively, and we as an organization could be more effective in influencing other people if we felt that was what was required. So I think it's more about comms and strategy, the stuff that I've already said, really. Certainly not a huge in-depth knowledge of the details of regulatory processes, because clearly I didn't bring that to the party.
How did you get buy-in from your team when obviously, you're working with all these technical experts that have the experience in regulatory, and then obviously you come in not having that background? How did you go about still showing them that you're able to add value and get their buy-in and support?
Well, I think there are a couple of things. One, having a science background was important. But I think that's been important throughout my career, because the stuff that I've been dealing with has always been, technically challenging. You're dealing with clinicians, you're dealing with lab techs, you're dealing with people who are scientists fundamentally. So I think a grasp of the science and recognizing that, that the other people have got a lot to offer, and really listening and helping them to communicate what they're trying to do to the people that they're trying to communicate with, helping them get the job done. So I think it's really using the team to get the best out of them, and hopefully they appreciate the fact that you've done that for them. So yeah, science was at the core of it, but most of it's just basic management. It's management stuff, engaging people. So I think that's sort of where leadership is quite transferable. I think if you have too much knowledge, sometimes your leadership can be constrained because you try to play out your view of the world rather than actually where the team needs to go, and you don't sub-optimize the use of the team. So I think it is basic set of leadership skills that I brought to the table rather than anything else.
That's really interesting, and you spoke about listening being really key. And that's well, for anyone that doesn't have a sales and marketing background, that's really key, isn't it? Being able to understand the needs of the people that you're working with and asking those open questions is really the key to being able to sell effectively, ultimately.
Yeah, true. To be fair, I have been accused of not listening quite a lot, so I kind of get, my enthusiasm runs away with me at times, and but essentially, I think all good marketing people are slightly paranoid. They're constantly looking out for environmental things that are going to put the business out of business. So and I think that bringing that and listening to what's happening externally, listening to people internally, is the key to the whole thing. And it's hard, actually. I know, because I've been accused of steamrolling people in meetings, which I didn't do consciously, but we all do it from time to time, I suspect, and we get very enthusiastic about an idea that we've had. And then later on, you realise it wasn't such a great idea.
So you mentioned also, you brought to the table a basic set of leadership skills, but some of our listeners might be earlier on in their leadership journey, and I'm really curious to understand from your perspective, what do you think makes a good leader?
Oh, right. Well, I can talk about perhaps a bit of some of the pillars of my philosophy on leadership. Nothing new, nothing original, but it's personal to me. I think the first thing is using your team and external stakeholders to build a vision of where you're going. And I used to like to call it a sort of blurred picture. It's clear enough to know the direction of travel, but it isn't, so finely and honed that it's prescriptive for that journey. But at least it's sort of, you can reference it along the way. Where are we going? Well, we know where we're going because it's that, that view of the world. So generating where do we want to get to, 3 to 5 years out, but not having a plan for that because 5 years is ridiculous. But generating that picture with your team and getting them to be party to building that vision. And that team might be your people who work for you. It might be other stakeholders who need to be brought into it because you need to work with them. So that's the first one. The second one is, however effective, if I can improve my own performance by 50% personally, it counts for nothing compared with improving the performance of the people that work for me. If you're sitting on the top of a pyramid, then if every layer in that pyramid can be 5% more effective, then it hugely eclipses anything you can do yourself. So in a way, leadership is about empowering and enabling others rather than what you do yourself. Really, what you do yourself is create that environment. And I guess the next principle is get good people. Don't recruit conservatively. I was in my mind, is this person going to be paying my pension? Will they take over my job in the future? Whereas some people are quite cautious. They think, well, this person's terribly bright. They're going to be quite difficult to manage. But actually, doing that's fatal. Get good people in and give them the space to grow. Let them, give them the freedom and the space and the support to grow. I think the other thing is, I've worked for a couple of micromanagers in my life, which is extremely frustrating. Good people and micromanagers don't go together. That's not me suggesting I'm particularly good, but certainly my experience is that micromanaging good people is the best way to get them out the door as fast as possible. So that kind of links to the thing I said before about giving people space to grow, but it also is about what you do as a leader, which is to focus on the big issues and leave the sort of stuff for the team. Be there to support, be there to help, but don't start trying to micromanage. That's catastrophic and sub-optimizes everything. You become a sort of bottleneck, I would say, in the organization's development. And finally, I think what good leaders do is give context to what the whole team's doing. Why, particularly something like the MHRA, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? Who do we need to know externally? And what sort of relationships do we have to have with those people so that we can be successful as an organization? So a good piece of external relationship management, sometimes managing and keeping stuff away from the team, like internal pressures. So I think I used to liken it to putting an umbrella up and preventing some of the stuff that's showering down on you from showering down on the rest of the team, which doesn't help them necessarily. So there's things you can deal with. So I think those are my five areas, if that covers it.
So what have we got? We've got set vision, empower and enable, marginal gains.
Well, it's room to grow, pyramid, the pyramid syndrome, 5%, focus on big issues, and then context and external relationships.
Really interesting. Really interesting. You said so much like in these last couple of minutes that I really want to dig into, but I don't even know where to start. Okay. One question I have for you then. So the point about setting that vision, right? You said it's about sort of like being able to say like, this is where we're going, and being able to set that general direction, but not in as much detail as like you literally have it all planned out, right? So it's that, and that sort of allows people to grow and to participate in that vision. You went on to say 5 years is ridiculous.
Yeah.
However, we have people that will go into interviews, and there's that classic interview question: where do you see yourself in 5 years? So what would you say to that? You know,
that's a really difficult question. I'd say, if somebody asked me that question, I'd say, well, this is where I'm aspiring to go. These are the sort of skills I want to develop. But to say, you know, I want to be vice president of X, Y, or Z in 5 years would be crazy, because I don't think the world's that predictable. And the environment you're in won't be that predictable. There might be somebody extremely good on your path. That, you know, I can't tell you the number of times I have helped my best people exit my team or the organization, because, you know, their aspirations don't match the situation that they're in. So, and invariably, the best thing to do in those circumstances is to say, well, how can I help you to achieve your objectives? One, they stay around longer often. They don't just, and you have time to plan for succession. All sorts of good things come out of that, and you can help them make the right decision for their careers as well. So there's some really, you know, sort of interesting contextual things. But I think 5-year plans in detail are clearly, like, you're likely to be disappointed or surprised. It could go either way. What you need to do to develop your skills to take opportunities that may come up in the future is a different matter. And I think you need to have a fairly clear idea of what you're good at, what you're not so good at, what you want to invest time and energy in, and whether that fits the aspirations you have for the future. I would say that was kind of my advice to people. Yeah.
So that idea of knowing what you're good at and what you're not so good at, what are your thoughts? So there's different schools of thought, right? When it comes to sort of like weaknesses, there's a school of thought of don't focus on them, put your time into the stuff you're really good at and absolutely master that. And there's the other school of thought, which is, you know, develop your weaknesses to become your strengths. Where do you sit on that spectrum?
Good one. I think you have to work on everything. I think ignoring your weaknesses is fatal, because at some stage one of those will defeat you. Equally, pretending that you're going to be brilliant at something you're not good at. You know, you look at anybody you know, any team you've ever been in, you know the people who are good at certain things, and you know that people aren't so good at other things. And great teams are teams who understand and recognize that, rather than measure people by the things that they're good at, which is fatal, of course. So if you like, I think it's important that you work on the lot, but more importantly, if you're in a leadership position, if you know that there are things you're not good at and you don't like doing, get somebody in who's good at it and likes doing it. You know, it's not rocket science in a way, and listen to them and let them. So I think you need to, but it's not quite as simple as that. Just get somebody in. It's a bit more complex, because you've got to manage them. You've got to understand enough of their world to be able to support and help them. So I think the answer is a bit of a mishmash of a lot, really. And I think for a leader, concentrating just on your strengths can be a weakness as well. You know, there's a classic case where somebody gets promoted from one role in an organization and they carry on really doing their old job as well as the new job. And the person who's gone into that job is completely disempowered. So I think sometimes you have to step away from the things you like doing and you're strong at, because by not doing that, you're suppressing the development of somebody who you've appointed to do the job anyway. So I think, you know, I think there's a simple answer to that, but you know, situationally and contextually different. But broadly speaking, don't try too hard to do things you're not good at. Do enough. And yes, use your strengths, but not necessarily directly.
And self-awareness is key ultimately when it comes to that. So you also spoke about this concept of what I call marginal gains, which you spoke about as the pyramid, which is this concept of making very, very small improvements across a much bigger scale, so across an organisation or a group of people, will have a much bigger impact. And I think I read a book, I can't remember exactly which one it was, but it was a cyclist, I believe, that was talking about this, right? So the idea was, you know, by slightly improving the tyre tread or slightly improving posture, ultimately ended up to him winning the race. Talk to me about the moment that you had that realization that that was actually the way to go, and that became more of a philosophy of yours.
That's a very good question. I'm not sure quite when it happened. There was a pivotal moment where I had a job, and up to that point, I'd thought if I do my best and have enough time, I can deliver the perfect product. There was a point where I realized, one, that I couldn't do that because I wasn't bright enough to deliver the perfect product, and two, I was never going to have time to do it. So that sort of changed my view to in terms of how to get stuff done. And I think it comes with confidence as a manager. So it's probably quite early in my managerial career, I realized that if you've got a lot on your mind and you're not sleeping, which we've all done probably at certain stages in our careers, because, you know, it can be tough. The best thing to do is to get a few people in a room and say, this is what was on my mind. I haven't got the answer. And it's amazing how often after an hour, you might not have the answer, but you've got a plan to get the answer, and it takes the pressure off you, and you learn stuff from your colleagues and people working for you who, you know, which you wouldn't have got to in a million years sat in a room on your own. So I think that was the sort of experience that I had. You know, it's an anxiety reducing mechanism, but it's also a performance driving mechanism as well. Right? So that was probably, you know, a couple of years into my first managerial job, and you have to have the confidence that you sort of to do that. Really, you have to open yourself up and say, I don't know, I'm your boss, but I don't know the answer to this. And some people find that really difficult. I've always found it very easy, but there again.
But no, you do speak to a very good point, because there's this whole thing of we see it a lot in particular with job applicants, right? And more often this oh, I have to fulfill all the criteria before I apply for this role, and we see it more often with women actually. And there's loads of stats and data about this, which is, you know, reading every single bullet point on a job and then saying, hey, I don't fulfill that one bullet point, so I'm not going to apply, you know, because I'm not currently doing exactly that thing. And one of my podcast episodes with Kristen Presner, she's at the time she was VP of HR for Roche Diagnostics, and she spoke about this concept of this race, right, where there's two people that are walking through the woods, and then a bear starts to chase them. So one of them starts tying his shoelaces, and the other one turns to the other one and says, well, there's a bear chasing us, you know, so why are you tying your shoelaces? You're never going to outrun a bear. To which the one tying the shoelaces turned around and said, yeah, but I don't need to outrun the bear, I just need to outrun you. So actually, you know, the idea of, you know, you don't have to be perfect, you just have to be better than whoever else is applying for a role to give yourself a chance, you know.
Well, also, I've recruited people who don't fit the bill, you know, often, because, you know, often I see people saying, well, what I want is this, 5 years, and you go, well, you know, I know one person in the UK who might fit that bill, but they're already employed and very happy. So almost inevitably, nobody fulfills all the criteria in a job application. And I think what you've got to do is to say, well, have I got enough of that? And two, am I far enough away from all of that that I'm not going to fail in the job? I can catch up and pick up. I was speaking to somebody yesterday, and one of the things I say to people, and it just reflects my own experiences, is if you're not a bit frightened of a new job going into it, you're probably going to be bored in 12 months. So, you know, I think these job changes are things you have to measure it very carefully. Is it right and such like, but also accept the fact it's going to be difficult. It's going to be a challenge. There will be things that you have blind spots But you've got to work on those. You have a plan to address those, I think.
So let's talk about hiring, because one of your key points was around getting good people and making sure that you're empowering them. And obviously, as you said, there is no perfect candidate that meets all your criteria. So when you were recruiting for your teams, both in industry, competent authority, across the board, what are some of the key things that you're looking for when you're hiring?
I'm looking for honesty and integrity. Am I actually talking to the person I'm interviewing, or am I talking to some, sort of mirage of them, or sort of interface that they're trying to put across? And that so I think that plays out in many ways, because you've got to have confidence that when the person comes in, they're going to be honest. They're going to talk to you about things they're concerned about. So it's about openness, really. So I think openness is and clarity in that context very important to me, people I'm recruiting. I want people who are, generally speaking, on a journey and can describe that journey career-wise, and we can share an agreement of what they can offer to me and the organization and what we can offer to them, and that's sort of understood on the way in, so you don't have any disappointments later on down the line. I'm looking for, so I guess I'm saying I'm looking for high emotional intelligence, as they would call it these days. And I think high emotional intelligence in all complex organizations trumps IQ and the like. So that's where I start. You clearly need people who are bright enough to process what they're doing and what the job entails. But I think that's probably the most important thing to me. So it's soft stuff rather than, and I think actually the hard stuff, which is, have you got X, Y, and Z, this experience, that experience, or whatever, for me is a secondary order, because I believe if you get good material, you can develop and train it, quite frankly. So it's more about attitudes and general disposition that sort of trumps other things for me. And I know other people have very long laundry lists of, and I've seen a lot of particularly public sector ads, and I think, God, it's just a laundry list of stuff, and you're really going to struggle to find somebody who finds this terribly exciting. But I don't know. That's my approach. Others will have other approaches, I'm sure.
and ultimately, we're in a world where jobs, they change and evolve, right? So the job you might take today, you might step into that role, and all of a sudden there might have been a reorganization, something's changed, someone's moved, product's been taken off the market, and now your focus is different. And so it's really about, like, what we try to say to companies is really try to understand, like, those soft skills and the competencies that you need the person to be able to have, because then the subject matter, ultimately they can adapt around it. And we also try to encourage candidates to look at a job not just as like a list of duties and activities, but really try to understand how that role is fitting within an organization, because there sometimes is flexibility, as the organization moves. Ultimately, we're in a fast-paced moving world where who knows what's coming around the corner.
Absolutely. And I think the byword for the modern age, if you like, is flexibility, adaptability, and the ability to change with changing circumstances. And to do that quickly, you either have to clear out one lot of people and bring a whole lot of new people in, which is a very bad idea, or you have the sort of people who are, you can deploy in a variety of ways. And that's a mindset for both the organisation and the people coming in. They have to know that this is a starting point of a journey, and they might go off on certain diversions. And some of the diversions in my career were the most informative. Somebody comes along at one stage when my first job as a sales manager, and says, we've got a problem with this industrial customer, which is a business-to-business thing. I was selling diagnostics to hospital. Actually, that's not right. I wasn't selling diagnostics to hospital. It doesn't matter. I had a sort of sales and marketing job, but there was a business-to-business project which was going badly wrong, which needed me to involved myself with manufacturing, quality, all these things which sales managers don't normally get involved in. It was hugely, hugely informative. That project, being able to do that project, developed me beyond recognition very quickly. And I had another one later on in my career where we had a massive manufacturing restructuring, and the supply chains just sort of fell apart, really. So although I was marketing director, I went to my boss and said, there's no point in me doing any marketing because that just creates demand which we can't satisfy. What I need to do is to sort out the supply chain. I had a year and a consultancy budget for people to re-engineer the supply chain, visit all the factories in the world, understand why there was a disconnect between what our customers wanted and what the factories were producing. Fantastic experience, which was unplanned, unexpected, and but it was just taking those opportunities in your career are the things that can deliver rewards which you can't imagine actually in terms of personal learning. So I think the point is keep your skills moving forward and take any opportunity that gives you a real learning opportunity, even though it might be a bit scary.
I really like your advice around you should be a little bit frightened before stepping into that new role, just the nervous anticipation of it all. That's a really nice piece of advice, actually. So let's talk about pressure, because obviously you've had some really big roles across your career. You spoke about having a very big role at BD, then obviously in a startup, obviously your role at Elemed, your role at MHRA. Obviously there must have been times where you've been under immense pressure. Can you talk to maybe one of those times and how you dealt with it?
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of occasions. Certainly, in corporate life, it's very different from public sector life. But I think, corporate life, you've got performance pressures and, things going wrong, colleagues losing confidence in you potentially, and that's usually fatal in corporate life. In public sector, I was involved. I walked into the MHRA at the start of the PIP breast implant scale, not knowing anything about being a public servant. I did know a bit, observing it, but not from the inside. It was pretty scary. And we had metal on metal. Press and TV all over us, and so I think those things definitely, sort of tick up your pulse rate for sustained periods of time. Again, I think what are the keys to dealing with it? Well, this is a hackneyed one, but works very, very well, which is, compartmentalization. And I kind of think although I've had plenty of sleepless nights, I'm pretty good at separating work from not work. And for me, not work, obviously, I've got a big family, but also it's been sport and physical exercise, which I thought physical exercise for me was my biggest tool to deal with things. So you've had a bad day, world's crashing in on you, go out for a run. It physically tires you out. It helps to sort of relax the whole thing. You just sort of get a bit more perspective. The other thing I found about physical exercise, and it still applies with walking, running, I don't do so much running now, I'm getting a bit old for it, is the opportunity to sort of chew things over in a non-active, non-anxiety generating way. When you're awake at 3 o'clock in the morning worrying about things, it's totally unproductive because stuff is spinning around and it's very focused on a particular problem. When you're out exercising in the environment, you can often be thinking of other things actively, but there's stuff chewing away, and it's like hard to say how to describe, because you're not actively thinking of anything at all, but things that are on your mind are being processed. It's probably similar to the things that happen when you're asleep and you're dreaming and such like. It's reprocessing stuff in your brain. So I found that extremely useful, and often my best ideas or solutions would come up out of the blue in situations like that. But also, what I've referred to before as well is using other people to share the load, because if you take on the burdens of the world on your own, then you're going to struggle, I think. Or some people can do it, but I can't. and using other people to help you develop, if nothing else, a plan to get out of the hole you think you're in, is a big starting point. So I guess that's probably my back of a fag packet view of the world.
No, but it's really interesting what you say. So I once had a history teacher, and he always taught us, when you have an exam, the first thing that you do is you open the exam paper and you read the whole exam paper from front to back before you start answering any questions. Because he would say that something would happen in your mind where the answers will just be mulling over in your mind as you start working through the exam paper, and the answers will start coming to you. So it's essential to sort of allow yourself the headspace, to not just dive straight into it, but to actually give yourself the headspace to read through the exam paper before you start answering question number one, so that your brain is somehow, working in the background, your subconscious, without you really realizing, and all of a sudden the answers will start naturally coming to you. And it's something that I've taken with me through life, and I have it the exact same thing about exercise and disconnecting, because whoever had their best idea sitting at a desk in the middle of the day trying to work through a problem, it's really about allowing yourself the space to not really think about it, but allow your brain to somewhere in the background, be still processing whatever that problem is, and somehow you'll get these random little breakthroughs. So I could totally connect with that piece of advice.
That thing about exams was something that I did, and it is, there's no question. I hadn't really related to it in that way, but I think you're probably right. It's and the other thing, reading my answers to exam papers, I sometimes can't believe I could have written them, because it seems so much better than I felt I was capable of. So I think there are occasions when you do sort of transcend to a higher level of consciousness, if you like, and stuff comes out that you never realized you had in there, actually. I think that's all part of that process.
Yeah, and pressure turns coal to diamonds, right? So that's another one I like. So you spoke about building teams. You've spoken about sort of like having that vision and driving people towards that goal. But maybe I'd love for you to sort of give some more insight on actually, how do you go about doing that? How do you actually go about bringing people together so that they're all focused on one common goal objective?
Well, I mean, I think it's difficult, especially in a very busy organization, because people don't want to take time out to do this because they're too busy. So, they're too busy doing tasks to do, it's this, and it's the ABC priority list, everybody does the C's because they're easy. They're sort of, doing the email while having a coffee, the A's, which are get the strategy right, they never have time for. So I think it is, one of the keys is blocking out the time to do that and creating an environment. So, typically you take people out of the workplace, put them somewhere, and create a safe environment for those sort of exchanges. Encouraging people to be very honest and open with each other. I think some psychometric tricks and tests are a good idea, because good teams recognize each other's weaknesses. I'm just let's use a football analogy. Bad teams, you see the players pointing at each other, shouting at each other, blaming each other for mistakes or things. Good teams, you see, one player will say, he's a bit weak on the, people coming in on the left side. I know I'm going to cover that for him, and concentrate on people's strengths. So I think it's about a matter of doing that. It's also about making sure that you don't get into too much groupthink. So it is perhaps bringing people in to stimulate and challenge external people, to stimulate and challenge. I remember doing a very good strategy process with one organization with the board, and we had an INSEAD professor come in. He knew nothing about our business, but he did a fantastic facilitation job and asked the right questions. So I think, it's about creating an environment where people can speak up and are comfortable being challenged, I think, and are able to talk to each other and say, I don't like that idea, and everybody's friends afterwards. It's not a sort of personal issue. So I think that whole strategy process is about bringing the team together. You can't outsource it. You can outsource inputs. You can't outsource the job. In the end, it's about a team coming to a conclusion with all the information they've got, which they're comfortable to sort of nail their colours to the mast of.
And having ownership in that, then being part of the process, and then
that's a big piece of it. If you're told, the old "I'm from head office and here to help you" sort of thing doesn't help. If you created something, then you'll have buy-in to it. If it's imposed on you, then even if you agree with it, sometimes you're going to resist it. So not healthy. So I think buy-in and just getting the best out of people, because mixed teams with different personalities and understanding those personalities is important. Why is so-and-so saying that at this particular moment? They're just being bloody difficult. No, they're not. That's the way their mind works. Actually, that perspective in the room is really quite valuable, because it counterbalances somebody over there who's got a sort of mirror image of that personality.
It's important to have dissenting voices around the table, isn't it? When you're so taking it to another place now, who inspires you, John?
Who inspired me? Do you know, that's a really difficult question. I mean, I'm going to give some sort of fairly, maybe a bit predictable. As a biologist, Charles Darwin has to be one of your inspirations, because I'm a biologist, and whatever you say, everything, all of my studies are underpinned by him, even though that some of his perspectives on aspects of it have been superseded. But fundamentally, he changed the world. So, and that ability to think completely independently of, which is something I couldn't do in a million years. In a fantastic way. The other one is W. Edwards Deming.
Okay.
Now, Deming is the guru of quality systems. So anybody in quality will understand and know the name of Deming, but he was much more than that. He actually wrote. It's more of a management philosophy than just about quality and quality systems and quality management. So I would suggest that anybody wants a career in business, there's lots and lots of business gurus come out of business schools and such like. He's the one that I go back to, and I think, God, he's so good. He was so insightful, and most, not all, because nobody gets everything right. Most of what he said, and he's one of his books captures his 14 points, major points. They're worth studying, actually, just going, well, do I agree with that or don't I? Generally speaking, I agree with pretty much all of them. And I think he was a business guru who's lasted the tests of time. Although he looks very 1950s and conservative, actually, if you listen to what he's saying, it applies to today, and it also applies to every situation and organisation. It's not, I think it would apply to the NHS in the UK or any health system just as much as it does manufacturing industry, as far as I'm concerned. So he's my sort of slightly left field inspiration. The third one really isn't a person. It's just being in rooms with inspiring people. And COVID has, I wouldn't say it's had a damaging effect on my mental health, because it hasn't, I don't think, because I've had lots of other things to do. But one thing I do miss and have missed is being in a room with good people, because it stimulates me to be better than I am in a way. Because and I think that's the one thing that post-COVID organizations need to make sure they can create the environment to do it. And it's, I guess it's back to my philosophies around leadership and strategy and all that stuff. It's about people and getting the best out of them. And different people are different in their natures and the way they look at things. But I think actually getting people into a room, and some of the people I've been in rooms with, I thought, bloody hell, that's incredible. Yeah, that is just the things that they come up with and the way they interact. And so I've probably been more inspired by situations and occasions than individual people in that context. But you know, what's happened, what's come out, how I felt coming out of the room, inspired. Yeah.
So what do you know now that you wish you knew when you were 21 years old?
Well, I wish I'd read W. Edwards Deming.
I'm going to add that to my reading list.
Well, the book's Out of the Crisis, which he published late in his life in 1982. But it's worth skimming, I think, probably, if nothing else. I think the other thing is, don't focus on your strengths or weaknesses. Focus on the package. Understand that you're not going to be good at everything. And I think, often people, you go into situations, people go, oh God, you know, I can't do this, I can't do that. It's like me and maths at school, you know, I had a blank spot, a complete blind spot for maths. But actually, I'm not that bad at it. It's created artificially in some respects. So, you know, don't punish yourself. Try and concentrate on your strengths and how you can use those. And I think that's something you have to learn, because you kind of take to heart any criticisms. And sometimes criticisms you need to take to heart. Sometimes it's just, you know, circumstances, what you would expect for somebody with your level of experience in your career. So don't take it to heart too much. Don't focus on what people, again, don't focus on people you work with what they're not good at. This is the football team analogy. Focus on what they are good at, and using the best of people. I mean, I've made bad misjudgments of people because I didn't understand them. I didn't understand where they were coming from. And actually, when you do understand where they're coming from, you go, that's interesting, and that's really quite valuable. So, so I think that's probably it.
Mm-hmm. I've got one last question for you, John. Yeah. The big one.
Right.
What's the legacy? What's the legacy that you want to leave on the world?
You know, that's a really difficult question.
I never said it would be easy, this podcast, by the way.
I'm not a politician, so you know, I'm not hell bent on appearing in history books for any reason. I mean, the one obvious and overwhelming one is I've got 4 sons, all of whom have done things that I couldn't dream of doing, you know, and have done brilliant things which I couldn't do. So, if you like, that's a legacy which is probably the most important thing to me. At a professional level, it's difficult really, because I always used to say, I don't know what I'm going to do when I grow up, really. So, and having been an athlete, you're only as good as your last race, or so I tend to, once you've cleared a hurdle, it's gone. This is the next hurdle. I spent so much time in life where that shouldn't be the case now, but I don't really dwell on these things too long. Tend to be rather forward-looking. But at a professional level, I think probably the most important thing to me is that looking and seeing those people who I've helped along the way. They might not consider that I have, but I hope they would. And people who go on to great things, who work for you, and you've given them a little bit of help to get to where they deserve to be. I'm not saying I would have done much. It's just helping people to get to where they deserve to be, really, and having a few of those around. And I think one of the things is, I always think good leaders leave a trail of successful people behind them. And that's,
I really like that.
Been something that I've tried to do, probably failed in a lot of cases, but in some cases I think I have been able to help. And that's probably the most important thing that I would take with me. It's nothing terribly ostentatious, but if somebody raises a glass and says thanks, then that's good enough for me.
Well, I have to say, from just knowing the market and knowing some of the people that you've worked with, you've definitely been able to have that impact. And, listeners of the last podcast with Steve Lee would have heard him mention your name as somebody who had a huge impact in his career. So it's been such a pleasure to talk to you, John. I've really, really enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much for your time.
Okay, well, no, it's been great fun for me. I've never really done this before, so I'm an avid podcast listener. So now I can see whether it's going to be excruciatingly painful listening to myself.
Well, I hope you do give it a good listen, because this was definitely an amazing episode. To everybody who's listened in, thank you so much for your time and listening. I hope you've got loads of value from this podcast with John Wilkinson. Don't forget to like, comment, connect with him, connect with us on LinkedIn, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks for another episode of Career Diaries by Elemed. Thank you, everybody, and goodbye.